There's a quiet debate happening right now inside military academies, inside Pentagon briefing rooms, and inside strategy departments of governments around the world. It is not a debate about weapons. It is not a debate about budgets. It is a debate about something far more fundamental. A single question: can the United States still fight and win wars the way it has for the past 30 years? Because for 3 decades, American military power has relied heavily on one central idea, a doctrine that became famous during the Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq. That doctrine is called shock and awe. The name sounds dramatic, almost cinematic, but behind it lies a very specific philosophy about how wars should be fought and how they should be won. The theory is elegant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting long wars of attrition where armies grind each other down over months or years, the idea is to strike the enemy with such overwhelming force in the opening hours of the conflict that the entire system collapses. Command centers are destroyed, communication networks are severed, air defenses are eliminated, political leadership is isolated, and once the brain of the system stops functioning, the body loses coordination. Soldiers panic, orders stop flowing, the government falls apart, the war ends before it has truly begun. For a long time, this strategy appeared almost unstoppable. When the United States launched Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the world witnessed something extraordinary. Precision-guided missiles striking targets hundreds of miles away, air defense systems destroyed with surgical accuracy, radar networks going dark within hours. Television viewers watched the night skies over Baghdad light up with explosions and concluded that warfare had changed forever. The message seemed clear. Technological superiority had rewritten the rules of war. The United States had discovered a way to end conflicts quickly, decisively, and with minimal risk to its own forces. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 seemed to reinforce that belief. Within weeks, one of the largest armies in the Middle East collapsed. The capital fell. The regime disappeared. From a purely military perspective, the opening stages of the war looked like the perfect demonstration of shock and awe. But here is where the story begins to change. Because what looked like victory in the first weeks of the war slowly transformed into something else entirely. A conflict that lasted nearly a decade. A conflict that cost trillions of dollars. A conflict where the technologically superior force won every major battle but struggled to control the country afterward. And that experience forced military planners to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if shock and awe works brilliantly at destroying governments, but does not actually end wars? To understand the problem, we have to examine one of the key assumptions behind the doctrine. Shock and awe assumes that power is centralized. It assumes that an enemy nation functions like a pyramid. At the top sits a leadership structure issuing orders. Below that are military commanders. Below them are soldiers executing those commands. If you destroy the top of the pyramid, the rest collapses. But modern conflicts are increasingly fought against organizations that do not operate that way. Many military forces now use decentralized command systems. Instead of waiting for orders from a central authority, smaller units operate independently. They already know their objectives. They already know the strategy. Cut off communication with headquarters, and they simply continue fighting. Destroy the leadership, and someone else immediately steps into the role. In other words, the system keeps functioning even after the head is removed. Now add another factor: asymmetrical warfare. In traditional wars, both sides attempt to match each other's strength. Tanks against tanks, aircraft against aircraft, missile systems against missile systems. But in asymmetrical warfare, the weaker side refuses to play that game. Instead of competing with advanced fighter jets and aircraft carriers, they adopt tactics that exploit the vulnerabilities of the stronger side. And one of the most powerful examples of this shift is something we are seeing more and more in modern conflicts: the rise of cheap, mass-produced drones. Imagine a small drone costing $50,000. It carries explosives. It can travel hundreds of miles. It can strike power plants, military bases, oil refineries, or ports. Now imagine a swarm of 100 of those drones launched at the same time. How does the technologically superior side defend against them? They use interceptor missiles, advanced defensive systems, sophisticated radar networks, but each interceptor missile might cost $1 million or more. Sometimes several missiles are required to guarantee a successful interception. Now do the math. A $50,000 drone destroyed by $2 million worth of defensive missiles. 100 drones might cost $5 million to produce. Stopping them could cost $200 million in defensive interceptors. And that is the economic trap of modern asymmetrical warfare. The weaker side forces the stronger side to spend itself into exhaustion. Even if the stronger side wins every engagement, the financial cost of victory becomes unsustainable. This dynamic is becoming even more dangerous because technology is spreading. 30 years ago, building sophisticated weapons required massive industrial infrastructure. Only the largest nations had the factories, the engineers, and the resources necessary to produce advanced military hardware. Today, the barrier to entry is falling. Commercial electronics are widely available. Software can be written anywhere in the world. Drones can be assembled in modest facilities rather than giant factories. The monopoly on advanced military capability that great powers once enjoyed is slowly eroding. And as that technological advantage narrows, strategies like shock and awe become less reliable. But there is another factor that military planners sometimes struggle to measure: human belief. Not all soldiers fight for the same reasons. Some fight because it is their profession. Some fight because they are ordered to. But in certain conflicts, people fight because they believe they are defending something sacred: their homeland, their religion, their identity. When war becomes tied to belief and ideology, the traditional logic of military strategy begins to break down. Bombing infrastructure does not produce surrender. Killing leaders does not collapse resistance. Sometimes suffering strengthens the determination to continue fighting. In these situations, overwhelming force can actually deepen the conflict rather than ending it. Which brings us to the central concern many strategists are quietly discussing today. What happens if shock and awe is used against an opponent that has specifically designed its military structure to survive it? What happens if the opening strikes destroy infrastructure but fail to collapse the system? What happens if the enemy simply absorbs the initial attack and continues fighting? Because the doctrine was never really built for that scenario. Shock and awe assumes the war ends quickly. But if it does not, then the conflict enters a completely different phase. A long war, a war of attrition, a war where economics, supply chains, and public support become as important as battlefield victories. And in today's world, prolonged wars carry consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield. Energy markets react instantly. Global trade routes become unstable. Financial markets panic. A regional war can trigger global economic shocks within days. This is why the question of military doctrine matters far beyond military institutions. The strategies governments believe will win wars shape how leaders think about conflict. They influence whether wars are started in the first place. If those strategies are based on outdated assumptions, the consequences could be enormous, because the doctrines that dominate military thinking today were largely developed in a different era. They were shaped by Cold War logic, tested against opponents who could not match American technological dominance. But the battlefield is changing. Drones, cyber warfare, decentralized command structures, cheap precision weapons, ideologically motivated fighters, all of these forces are reshaping how wars are fought, which leads to the deeper and more unsettling question, not just whether a major war might happen in the future, but whether the strategies powerful nations believe will win that war are actually suited to the world we live in today. Because if shock and awe is a doctrine built for a past era of warfare, then the next major conflict could reveal that reality in the most expensive way imaginable.